Hello, today is Tuesday, September 28th, 2021. I'm Joe Schmidt from TC2, and this is Staying Connected. On a recent podcast, Ben Fox, one of TC2's managing directors, Ben joined me to talk about value-added reseller services. Ben sort of teed up something at the end of that podcast when he mentioned that enterprises should understand the importance of having direct relationships with key product manufacturers, or OEMs, because those are the products companies purchase through resellers. Well, that was so intriguing that I have Ben back with me today so that we can dig deeper and look at the complexities of those relationships, and to talk specifically about the relationships with one of the bigger OEMs that customers tend to deal with in IT, and that is, namely, Cisco. Hey, Ben, welcome back.
Hello, Joe. Good to be here again.
So you mentioned to me before we started this podcast that by the end of Cisco's 2020 financial year, more than half of Cisco's revenue was attributable to software and services. And that additionally, 78% of Cisco's software revenue is now from software subscriptions. So what do you think that means for enterprise customers?
Well, I'd say that I think the key takeaway from those stats, Joe, is that Cisco is evolving fast to extract more revenue from recurring services and from software subscriptions, and relying far less on one-time discretionary purchases of hardware and perpetually licensed software. And that means that enterprise buyers must also evolve their relationships with Cisco to reflect this different way of purchasing Cisco products. So I suppose to elaborate a little, Cisco has always enjoyed a degree of recurring revenue services. Hardware maintenance via Cisco's SmartNet services is a good example of that. But in more recent years, Cisco has definitely introduced a bunch more additional recurring revenue streams. So things like recurring fees for software maintenance services over and above the SmartNet fees, software upgrade assurance on certain products like UC, which provides entitlements to future software upgrades. And I think continuing that trend towards recurring revenue, Cisco steadily shifted its licensing model for software that's used with its latest hardware products from perpetual software licenses to subscription services. So DNA licenses and DCN licenses, for instance, are all now offered on a subscription basis. And this shift is also in addition to all the cloud services, all the managed services and the professional services that we see enterprises consuming from Cisco at a rapidly increasing pace.
So these shifts, they must have a pretty significant impact on enterprises' relationships with Cisco.
Yes, they really do. I think what's happening is that enterprise customers' transactions with Cisco, they're now less about kind of arm's length one-time purchases and far more focused on recurring services and entitlements to subscription software and cloud services. So we're seeing Cisco buying programs such as their Cisco Services Full Coverage program for maintenance, along with a whole range of Cisco enterprise agreement structures, really moving customers towards larger multi-year enterprise-wide deals with Cisco and away from just individual ad hoc technology buys. So obviously the benefits to Cisco of transitioning to such deals, I think, are clear. But it's true that there are also a bunch of benefits for customers, not least that Cisco tends to offer additional discounts under some of these agreement structures. But also over and above discounting, I really think it can make a lot of sense for customers to move away from ad hoc purchases of individual software subscriptions to a more organized arrangement that pulls all the subscriptions, all the contracts together in one easier to manage package, if you will. But I would also add to that and say that I think large, multi-year, complex enterprise-wide transactions, they require far more scrutiny, more financial analysis, and definitely more SME review than typically occurs with these kind of a la carte commodity one-time product purchases and annual maintenance renewals and things like that. They also require structuring and putting in place and negotiating a more robust contractual framework with Cisco, which we find that many of our clients simply don't have. That contractual framework with Cisco doesn't exist. Since until this point, all transactions they've been relatively straightforward purchases through indirect channels, such as under VAR contracts. So we see that these new purchasing arrangements from Cisco present a whole host of material, financial, legal, and operational risks. So we find it's increasingly important to negotiate those custom direct agreements with Cisco to mitigate those risks, even if it's really VARs that will handle actual order and delivery fulfillment.
You know, I would think the other natural consequence of these longer-term strategic transactions with Cisco is that they provide a catalyst for customers to re-examine their entire relationship with Cisco.
Yes, that's very true. What we found is that as a direct result of enterprise customers being presented with these types of buying programs from Cisco, they've been coming to us to help them assess their relationship with Cisco and seek improved pricing, improved commercial arrangements across the board, as well as preparing to put in place that more robust contractual platform with Cisco that I mentioned. And it's actually quite an interesting and important exercise to just pull together all the different elements of a customer's spend and services with Cisco as part of the preparation for that negotiation. And it's really important that really should include everything. So not just aggregate purchases of hardware and software, but spend on Cisco professional services, such as business critical services, high-touch expert care, spend on hardware maintenance contracts, software maintenance contracts, WebEx services, cloud security services, software subscription, services from Cisco companies like AppDynamics. I could go on, but I'll stop there. And what we routinely find when we dig into all of this is that our clients actually have more spend with Cisco than they thought. Partly because, of course, Cisco products, they're often bought from a range of different VARs, i.e. it's indirect spend, as we spoke about during the VAR podcast. So because of that, lots of indirect spend through different VARs, not just one place. It's not always that easy to collate the full picture.
Yeah, I get that. That makes a lot of sense. I think there can be a lot of shadow IT spend with Cisco.
Yeah, very true. And we definitely find spend that the network group didn't know existed. And what we find is that oftentimes individual businesses within the enterprise, they purchase Cisco products kind of independently, which perhaps don't fall under the purview of corporate IT. So, for example, we've had clients that have enterprise arrangements in place for maintenance of all of their Cisco hardware. For example, a so-called branded maintenance offering with a third party. But then over and above that, we find significant spend on standalone Cisco SmartNet maintenance contracts. Meaning that the sort of IT group's initial assumption that SmartNet doesn't need to be cared for and SmartNet discounts don't need to be negotiated because the third-party branded maintenance contract addresses all maintenance, well, that assumption is just incorrect because of that shadow IT spend as you were talking about. And then the other key challenge with holistically understanding your Cisco spend and relationship is that it is more than likely that Cisco tracks your transactions with them differently than you do. So, for instance, if you purchase a set of 3-year SmartNet maintenance contracts from Cisco, you may likely finance that through Cisco Capital at no additional cost. So from the customer's perspective, that feels like an annual spend with Cisco. But actually, Cisco received all 3 years up front from Cisco Capital. So from Cisco's perspective, that's a big payment in year 1 and 0 in years 2 and 3. So simply understanding those dynamics and considering how Cisco views you, not just how you view Cisco, becomes really important in developing your Cisco relationship and negotiation strategies.
Hey, Ben, you've mentioned Cisco enterprise agreements a couple of times. Why don't you talk a little bit more about Cisco EAs?
Yes, certainly. So Cisco EAs or enterprise agreements are, like many other vendors' enterprise agreements, essentially a purchasing and contracting vehicle for software and cloud services that Cisco provides that addresses a company's consumption of such software and cloud services on an enterprise-wide basis, rather than via multiple individual transactions for individual volumes of licenses or workloads or users or whatever. And the good news is that Cisco offers various commercial benefits for customers who shift from individual transactions to enterprise agreements, such as deeper discounting, such as growth allowances sometimes, and certainly a structured approach to paying for additional subscriptions and volume. But equally, of course, there will be some complexity and challenges to resolve in the negotiation. For instance, how existing prepaid software and services reduce the price of the enterprise agreement because otherwise you're paying for it twice. The degree of flexibility the EA provides to shift between different software and cloud products, and how true-ups and true-forwards are measured and charged for, just to mention a few. As I mentioned earlier, I do think that these multi-year enterprise-wide transactions, they really do need significant scrutiny and financial analysis, SME review, and legal review when you enter into them. And as you pointed out earlier, Joe, actually, it's advisable to look at your entire Cisco relationship when you start looking into Cisco enterprise agreements, because if nothing else, the enterprise agreement provides the customer with a lot of leverage to revisit its wider pricing and wider contractual arrangements with Cisco.
Okay, good stuff. Thanks, Ben. This has been a great discussion. Now, if you would like to learn more about structuring and negotiating enterprise-wide Cisco transactions and maximizing the value you realize from your relationship with Cisco, or if you have other ICT needs, you can contact Ben, me, or any of our LB3 and TC2 colleagues by giving us a call or dropping us an email. You can also stay current by subscribing to these Staying Connected podcasts, by checking out our websites, and by following us on LinkedIn.